the vast expanse of the South Pacific, where endless blue waters stretch beyond the horizon, lies one of maritime history's most perplexing mysteries. A story that begins with a routine voyage and ends with questions that have haunted investigators for nearly 7 decades. A ship born from war, the year was 1931 when the MV Joyita first touched water, emerging from the shipyards as a luxury yacht built for wealthy Americans. At 70 feet in length, she was crafted with a double hull and watertight compartments features that would prove both crucial and confounding in the events to come. Her name, Joyita, meaning Little Jewel in Spanish, seemed fitting for this elegant vessel that would spend her early years cruising the pristine waters off the American coast. But war changes everything. By 1943, the United States Navy had requisitioned the Joyita, transforming this pleasure craft into a patrol boat. For 2 years, she served dutifully in the Pacific Theater, her elegant lines now bristling with military equipment. When peace returned, the Little Jewel found herself surplus to requirements, eventually making her way to Samoa, where she began a new chapter as a merchant vessel in the island trade. The final voyage begins. October 3rd, 1955. The tropical sun cast long shadows across the wharf at Samoa Pago as Captain Thomas Henry Miller made his final preparations. Miller, a 48-year-old American with decades of Pacific sailing experience, had been hired to captain the Joyita on what should have been a routine 5-day journey to the Tokelau Islands. The cargo holds were packed with food supplies, building materials, and medical equipment desperately needed by the isolated island communities. 25 souls would make this journey passengers, seeking passage to remote islands, crew members, and even a government official traveling on administrative business. Among them were families with children, traders, and workers, all trusting their lives to Captain Miller and his vessel. The passenger manifest read like a cross-section of Pacific Island life. Europeans, Americans, and Pacific Islanders, each with their own reasons for making this journey across hundreds of miles of open ocean. As the Joyita's engines rumbled to life that afternoon, no one could have imagined they were witnessing the beginning of one of the Pacific's greatest maritime mysteries. Into the blue. The initial hours passed without incident. Radio operator Chuck Simpson maintained regular contact with shore stations, his messages routine and unremarkable. The weather was fair, the seas calm, perfect conditions for the journey ahead. The Joyita was expected to reach her first destination within 48 hours, following well-established shipping lanes that had been traveled safely countless times before. But somewhere in the vast Pacific, between Samoa and the Tokelau's, something went terribly wrong. When the Joyita failed to arrive at her scheduled time, concern quickly turned to alarm. The vessel carried enough supplies for several weeks, and Captain Miller was known for his reliability. Search aircraft were dispatched, their crews scanning the endless expanse of blue for any sign of the missing ship. Naval vessels joined the hunt, following the Joyita's intended route while expanding their search pattern across thousands of square miles of ocean. Days stretched into weeks. The search became one of the largest maritime rescue operations in the region's history, with aircraft from New Zealand, Fiji, and other Pacific nations joining the effort. Yet the ocean kept its secrets, revealing nothing but empty waves and distant clouds. Discovery in the depths. 5 weeks after the Joyita's disappearance, Captain Gerald Douglas of the merchant vessel Tuvalu spotted something unusual on the horizon. Partially submerged, listing heavily to starboard and barely recognizable, the Joyita sat half-drowned in the Pacific swells. She had drifted over 600 miles from her intended course, a ghost ship riding the currents like a piece of maritime flotsam. But the Joyita they found was not the same vessel that had departed Samoa. Her superstructure was partially submerged, with water lapping at portholes that should have been high above the waterline. Most unsettling of all, the ship was completely deserted. Not a single person from the 25 souls who had departed remained aboard. Evidence and enigmas. As investigators swarmed over the wreck, they encountered a series of baffling discoveries. The Joy-Eater's logbooks, which should have contained a record of the voyage's final hours, were missing. Life rafts and lifeboats were gone, suggesting that the passengers and crew had abandoned ship, but under what circumstances remained unclear. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the vessel, some items missing while others remained untouched. Perhaps most puzzling was the condition of the ship herself. While the Joy-Eater was partially flooded, her cork-lined hull should have made her virtually unsinkable. The vessel's construction, with its multiple watertight compartments, meant that even significant flooding shouldn't have been fatal. Yet here she was, riding dangerously low in the water, her cargo holds partially submerged. Investigators found evidence of flooding from a blown cooling system, which could have disabled the engines and left the ship adrift. But this mechanical failure alone wouldn't have necessitated abandoning a vessel designed to remain afloat, even when severely damaged. Radio equipment appeared to have been deliberately dismantled, though whether this occurred before or after the emergency remained unknown. Theories emerged from the depths. In the absence of survivors or clear evidence, theories proliferated like coral formations in warm water. Some investigators suggested piracy. The Pacific Islands were not immune to such criminal activity, and the Joy-Eater's cargo would have been valuable to desperate men. The missing radio equipment and logbooks supported this theory, as pirates would want to eliminate evidence of their crime. Others pointed to more mundane explanations. Perhaps the engine failure had been more serious than initially thought, leaving the vessel powerless in rough seas. Panicked passengers and crew might have taken to the lifeboats prematurely, only to be lost in the vast Pacific when the Joy-Eater proved more seaworthy than they had believed. The official inquiry, led by experienced maritime investigators, ultimately concluded that flooding from the failed cooling system had caused the ship to list severely. In this scenario, those aboard would have abandoned ship believing it was sinking, not realizing that the Joy-Eater's construction would keep her afloat for weeks. The lifeboats, insufficient for such a long ocean voyage, would have been overwhelmed by the Pacific's immensity. Questions that refused to sink. Yet for all the official explanations, troubling details refused to be swept away by the tide of conventional wisdom. Why had experienced Pacific sailors like Captain Miller abandoned a vessel that was clearly still afloat? How had the Joy-Eater drifted so far from her intended course? What had happened to the life rafts and emergency equipment that should have given passengers and crew a fighting chance? The radio silence remained particularly puzzling. Even if the main radio had failed, emergency equipment should have allowed distress calls. The complete absence of any Mayday signal suggested either catastrophic failure or deliberate interference with communications. Neither explanation sat comfortably with the evidence at hand. Echoes across the Pacific. Today, nearly 70 years later, the MV Joy-Eater rests on the ocean floor, her final journey complete. The families of those 25 souls who vanished with her have long since ceased their vigil, their loved ones becoming part of the Pacific's eternal mystery. Maritime museums display artifacts recovered from the wreck, silent witnesses to a tragedy that defies easy explanation. The case files remain open, though no investigators actively pursue new leads. Occasionally, researchers revisit the evidence with fresh eyes and modern techniques, hoping that technology might reveal what human inquiry could not. Deep-sea exploration has advanced remarkably since 1955, and some believe the wreck of the Joy-Eater might still yield secrets if properly examined. But perhaps the real mystery lies not in what happened to the Joy-Eater, but in what her story reveals about the ocean itself. The Pacific's vast emptiness, its ability to swallow lives and vessels without trace, serves as a reminder that despite all our modern navigation and communication technology, the sea remains as mysterious and unforgiving as it was to the first human who dared venture beyond sight of land. The MV Joy-Eater's legacy lives on in every Pacific crossing, every routine voyage that carries within it the possibility of becoming something far more extraordinary and far more troubling than anyone aboard could ever imagine. In the annals of maritime history, few disappearances have captured the imagination quite like that of a single passenger liner that vanished without trace in the treacherous waters off South Africa's coast, taking with her 201 souls and spawning a mystery that has endured for more than a century. Birth of a giant. The year was 1908 when the SS Waratah first cut through the waters of the River Clyde in Scotland, her massive hull gleaming with fresh paint and promise. Built by Barclay, Curley and Company for the Blue Anchor Line, she was a marvel of Edwardian engineering, 465 feet of steel, and ambition, designed to ferry passengers between Europe and Australia along one of the world's most challenging shipping routes. With accommodations for 689 passengers across 3 classes and a crew of 154, the Waratah represented the pinnacle of early 20th century ocean travel. Her twin screws could propel her 9,339-ton mass at a respectable 13 knots, while her elegant public rooms and well-appointed cabins promised comfort during the long journey to the Australian colonies. The ship's name, derived from the distinctive Australian shrub with its brilliant red flowers, seemed to herald a bright future connecting the old world with the new. Yet from her earliest voyages, whispers of concern followed the Waratah like shadows on water. Some passengers reported an uncomfortable rolling motion, a tendency for the vessel to heel over more dramatically than expected in moderate seas. These complaints, dismissed by the shipping company as the typical adjustments required for any new vessel, would later take on an ominous significance that no one could have anticipated. The maiden voyage and growing unease. Captain Joshua Ilbery, a veteran of 30 years at sea, took command of the Waratah with the confidence that came from decades of navigating the world's most challenging waters. His reputation was impeccable, his experience unquestionable. Under his command, the Waratah completed her maiden voyage to Australia in February 1909, carrying passengers eager to start new lives in the distant colonies. But even during this successful first crossing, troubling reports began to surface. Some passengers complained of the ship's stability, noting how she seemed to roll excessively in moderate swells and appeared slow to recover from heavy rolls. One passenger, Claude Sawyer, became so concerned about the vessel's behaviour that he disembarked in Durban during the return journey, forgoing his passage back to London. His later testimony would become crucial evidence in understanding the Waratah's final fate. Sawyer described dreams of a ship in distress, of a vessel rolling beyond recovery. While his account might have been dismissed as the nervous imaginings of an inexperienced traveller, his technical observations carried more weight. He noted how the Waratah seemed top-heavy, how she would hang at steep angles longer than a properly balanced ship should, and how her recovery from rolls appeared sluggish and incomplete. The final departure, July 26, 1909. The South African port of Durban bustled with its typical commercial energy as the SS Waratah prepared for what would become her most infamous voyage. Captain Ilbery had taken on 211 passengers and crew for the journey to Cape Town, a relatively short hop along the South African coast that should have taken no more than 3 days under normal conditions. Among the passengers were families returning from visits to the colonies, businessmen conducting trade between the ports, and tourists who had come to experience the wild beauty of southern Africa. The passenger manifest read like a cross-section of colonial society, mining engineers, government officials, farmers, and their families, all trusting their lives to Captain Ilbery and his vessel. The cargo holds were loaded with wool, hides, and other raw materials bound for European markets, along with personal effects and correspondence from the growing South African communities. As the Waratah's whistle echoed across Durban harbour that July evening, no one watching from the quay could have imagined they were witnessing the final chapter of 201 human stories. Into the Agulhas current, the Waratah's intended route would take her around the treacherous Cape of Good Hope, through waters where the warm Agulhas current meets the cold Benguela current in a tumultuous marriage that has claimed hundreds of vessels over the centuries. These waters, known to mariners worldwide for their unpredictable and violent seas, require skill, experience, and vessels of proven seaworthiness. Captain Ilbery had navigated these waters countless times before. His experience should have been more than adequate to handle whatever conditions awaited. Weather reports from the period indicate that while conditions were not ideal, they were well within the normal parameters for the region during the South African winter. The Waratah was expected to reach Cape Town by July 29th. When she failed to appear, initial concern was muted delays were common along this route, and steamships often sheltered in bays and inlets during rough weather. But as hours stretched into days, worry began to spread through the shipping community like ripples across still water. The silence grows. By August the 1st, with no word from the Waratah for nearly a week, the alarm was raised in earnest. The ship had vanished as completely as if she had never existed, leaving no distress signals, no wreckage, no trace of her passage through waters travelled by numerous other vessels. The silence was absolute and deeply unsettling. Search operations began immediately, involving both naval and civilian vessels. The route between Durban and Cape Town, while challenging, was relatively short and well-travelled. If the Waratah had encountered trouble, other ships should have been in position to observe distress signals or wreckage. Yet the searchers found nothing, not a single lifebelt, not a piece of decking, not even the oil slick that might mark where a ship had foundered. The British Royal Navy dispatched warships to join the search, while commercial vessels diverted from their routes to scour the waters off the South African coast. Aircraft were not yet available for maritime search and rescue in 1909, so the hunt relied entirely on surface vessels methodically combing vast expanses of often turbulent ocean. Theories emerged from the deep. As the search stretched into weeks without result, investigators and maritime experts began developing theories to explain the Waratah's disappearance. The most obvious explanation centered on the ship's reported stability problems. If the vessel was indeed top-heavy, as passenger Claude Sawyer had suggested, she might have encountered a wave pattern that caused her to roll beyond her ability to recover. In the treacherous waters off South Africa, where massive waves can appear with little warning, an unstable vessel could be overwhelmed in minutes. If the Waratah had capsized completely, her heavy cargo and engines would have carried her to the bottom rapidly, leaving little time for distress signals or for debris to surface. Other theories pointed to more dramatic possibilities. Some suggested that the ship had encountered one of the region's notorious rogue wave single waves of extraordinary height that can appear suddenly in the confluence of currents around the Cape. Such a wave could have overwhelmed even a stable vessel, flooding her through broken windows or hatches and sending her down before anyone could react. Mechanical failure provided another possible explanation. If the Waratah had suffered a catastrophic engine failure in rough seas, she might have been driven onto rocks along the dangerous coastline, breaking up completely in the surf. The powerful currents and frequent storms along this coast could easily have scattered any wreckage beyond recognition. The search continues. In the decades following the Waratah's disappearance, the mystery has attracted amateur investigators, professional salvagers, and maritime historians. Modern sonar technology has revealed numerous wrecks along the South African coast, raising hopes that one might prove to be the missing liner. Each discovery brings renewed excitement, followed inevitably by disappointment when detailed examination reveals yet another vessel from the countless ships that have fallen victim to these waters over the centuries. The most promising discovery came in recent decades when sonar detected a large wreck in approximately the right location and of roughly the correct dimensions. Initial surveys suggested this might finally be the Waratah, but subsequent investigation revealed it to be another vessel entirely, adding one more false hope to the long list of near discoveries. Modern technology, ancient mystery. Today, sophisticated underwater search equipment can map the ocean floor with unprecedented precision. Submersibles can explore depths that were completely inaccessible in 1909, while side-scan sonar can detect objects buried under decades of sediment. Yet despite these technological advances, the SS Waratah continues to elude discovery, as if the ocean itself were determined to preserve her secrets. The continuing mystery has spawned books, documentaries, and countless theories from researchers around the world. Some maritime historians believe the ship lies in waters too deep for practical exploration, while others maintain she broke up completely in shallow water, her remains scattered by a century of storms and currents. Echoes in the deep. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Waratah's disappearance lies not in what happened, but in how completely the ocean swallowed all trace of her existence. In an age when maritime disasters typically left some evidence wreckage washing ashore, survivors in lifeboats, oil slicks marking disaster sites, the Waratah simply vanished as though she had never been. The families of those 201 souls received no closure, no final resting place to visit, no clear understanding of how their loved ones met their end. They joined the ranks of maritime families whose grief is complicated by uncertainty, whose mourning is shadowed by hope that somehow, somewhere, answers might yet surface. As modern vessels continue to traverse the waters where the Waratah vanished, their crews occasionally report strange sonar contacts or unusual debris that might, just might, provide the first clue to solving this century-old mystery. Each sighting is investigated, each possibility explored, but the ocean keeps its secrets as securely today as it did in 1909. The SS Waratah remains somewhere beneath those rolling South African swells, her passengers and crew forever frozen in time at the moment when routine voyage became eternal, mystery waiting, perhaps, for the day when technology finally outmatches the sea's determination to preserve the secrets it guards so jealously in the darkness below. In the scorching heat of January 1980, somewhere in the vast expanse of the Arabian Sea, a massive tanker carrying crude oil erupted in flames that could be seen from 30 miles away. But the inferno that consumed the MV Salem would prove to be far less mysterious than the questions surrounding the fate of her crew. Birth of a supertanker. The MV Salem emerged from the Astilleros Españoles shipyard in Bilbao, Spain, in 1963, a testament to the post-war boom in maritime oil transportation. At 656 feet in length and capable of carrying over 120,000 tons of crude oil, she represented the new generation of supertankers designed to feed the world's growing appetite for petroleum. Her massive hull, divided into numerous cargo tanks and protected by sophisticated safety systems, was engineered to safely transport one of the most dangerous cargoes across the world's oceans. For 17 years, the Salem plied the established routes between oil terminals and refineries. Her holds, filled with the black gold that powered modern civilization. Under various flags and ownership arrangements, she had weathered storms, navigated political tensions in volatile regions, and completed hundreds of voyages without serious incident. Her crew quarters, engine rooms, and navigation bridge had become home to countless mariners who trusted their lives to her steel hull and experienced officers. The ship's safety record was exemplary, her maintenance protocols rigorous. Nothing in her operational history suggested that the Salem was anything other than a reliable, well-maintained vessel operated by competent professionals. Yet beneath this facade of routine maritime commerce, the elements of an extraordinary mystery were already beginning to align. A routine loading. December 1979 found the MV Salem docked at Karg Island in the Persian Gulf, one of Iran's primary oil export terminals. Despite the political upheaval following the Iranian Revolution earlier that year, oil operations continued. under the watchful eyes of the new Islamic regime. The Salem's crew, led by Captain Georgios Vardinoyannis, went about their familiar routines of loading crude oil bound for international markets. The ship's manifest listed her cargo as 190,000 tons of Iranian crude oil, a valuable payload that would fetch millions of dollars upon delivery to refineries in Europe or Asia. Loading operations proceeded normally, with crew members monitoring the flow of oil into the ship's numerous cargo tanks, while ensuring proper ballast management to maintain stability during the upcoming voyage. Captain Vardinoyannis, a veteran Greek mariner with decades of experience commanding tankers in these politically sensitive waters, oversaw preparations with the methodical attention to detail that had kept him and his crews safe throughout a distinguished career. His 34-man crew represented multiple nationalities, as was common in the international shipping industry: Greeks, Indians, Pakistanis, and others who had signed aboard for what should have been another routine voyage across familiar waters into dangerous waters. On January 7, 1980, the MV Salem departed Karg Island, bound for Rotterdam, following shipping lanes that had been travelled safely by thousands of tankers over the previous decades. Her route would take her down the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz, and into the Arabian Sea before heading toward the Suez Canal and European markets. These were treacherous times for maritime traffic in the region. The Iranian hostage crisis had heightened tensions between Iran and the United States, while the Iran-Iraq war was beginning to simmer, threatening to spill over into attacks on civilian shipping. Tankers carrying Iranian oil faced particular scrutiny and potential threats from various international actors seeking to influence the regional balance of power. Despite these political complications, the Salem's voyage proceeded normally for the first 10 days. Captain Vardinoyannis maintained regular radio contact with shore stations and other vessels, reporting his position and status according to standard maritime protocols. Weather conditions were typical for the season, with moderate temperatures and manageable sea states, presenting no unusual challenges to navigation or cargo security. Fire in the Arabian Sea. At approximately 5:00 a.m. on January 17, 1980, while positioned roughly 700 miles southwest of Karachi in international waters, the MV Salem experienced a catastrophic explosion that would transform her from an anonymous commercial vessel into one of maritime history's most puzzling mysteries. The blast, centered in the ship's engine room area, sent flames shooting hundreds of feet into the pre-dawn darkness, while igniting crude oil that had apparently leaked from damaged cargo tanks. The explosion was so violent that it could be seen by ships more than 30 miles away. Those who witnessed the fireball described a spectacular display of orange and red flames against the black Arabian Sea, with dense black smoke rising thousands of feet into the morning sky. The intensity of the fire suggested that something far more devastating than a typical engine room accident had occurred aboard the Salem. Within hours, international maritime rescue services were coordinating response efforts, with ships from multiple nations converging on the Salem's last known position. What they found would defy easy explanation and launch decades of investigation, speculation, and conspiracy theories that continue to this day. The survivor's tale. When rescue vessels reached the burning wreck of the MV Salem, they encountered a scene of devastation that challenged their understanding of maritime disasters. The massive tanker was consumed by flames from bow to stern, her superstructure twisted by the heat and her cargo tanks rupturing in secondary explosions that sent more crude oil feeding the inferno. But the mystery deepened when rescuers accounted for survivors. Of the 35 men who had been aboard the Salem when she departed Karg Island, only one was found alive in the water near the burning wreck. This single survivor, badly burned and suffering from exposure, provided the only first-hand account of the disaster testimony that would raise more questions than it answered. According to the survivor's statements, given while he recovered from severe injuries, the explosion had occurred without warning during routine operations. He described a massive blast that had killed or incapacitated most of the crew instantly, followed by fires that spread with extraordinary rapidity throughout the ship. His account of escaping the inferno was fragmentary, confused by trauma and the effects of smoke inhalation. Most troubling was what the survivor could not explain: the complete absence of the other 34 crew members. In maritime disasters, even catastrophic explosions typically leave some evidence of those aboard bodies in the water, survivors in lifeboats, or at minimum, personal effects floating near the wreck site. The Arabian Sea around the Salem yielded none of these traces. The investigation begins. International maritime authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the Salem incident. Though their efforts were complicated by the remote location of the disaster and the complete destruction of the ship's records and navigation equipment, the vessel burned for several days before finally sinking in deep water, taking with her most of the physical evidence that might have explained the cause of the explosion. Investigators faced immediate questions about the nature and timing of the blast. Engine room explosions, while serious, typically did not produce the kind of catastrophic destruction witnessed aboard the Salem. The complete absence of survivors, except for one badly injured crew member, suggested something far more devastating than mechanical failure or even sabotage directed at ship systems. Initial theories focused on the volatile political environment surrounding Iranian oil exports. Some investigators suggested that the Salem might have been targeted by forces opposed to the Iranian regime, using sophisticated explosives designed to ensure complete destruction of the vessel and her cargo. The timing of the blast, during pre-dawn hours when most of the crew would have been sleeping, supported theories of deliberate attack rather than accidental explosion. Competing theories. As the investigation progressed, competing explanations emerged from various international agencies and maritime experts. Some pointed to the possibility of internal sabotage, suggesting that political operatives might have infiltrated the crew or planted explosive devices during the loading process at Carg Island. The complete destruction of the ship and near-total loss of life would be consistent with professionally planned demolition rather than accidental explosion. Others proposed more conventional explanations, arguing that the Salem had suffered a catastrophic failure of safety systems that allowed crude oil vapors to accumulate in dangerous concentrations before igniting from routine engine operations. Such explosions, while rare, could theoretically produce the kind of devastating fireball witnessed by other ships in the area. A more sinister theory suggested that the Salem incident was connected to insurance fraud or deliberate destruction of cargo for political purposes. The valuable crude oil aboard the tanker, combined with the complex international tensions surrounding Iranian petroleum exports, provided potential motives for deliberately destroying the ship while making the incident appear accidental. The classified files. Perhaps most intriguingly, declassified intelligence documents from the period suggest that various national intelligence agencies took significant interest in the Salem incident. References to the disaster appear in documents dealing with Middle Eastern political affairs, maritime security, and even nuclear non-proliferation efforts, though the specific connections remain heavily redacted decades later. These intelligence references have fueled speculation that the MV Salem was carrying more than crude oil when she exploded in the Arabian Sea. Some researchers have suggested that the ship might have been transporting sensitive materials related to weapons programs, or that her destruction was part of covert operations designed to disrupt Iranian revenue streams during a period of international isolation. The involvement of intelligence agencies, while not necessarily sinister, indicates that the Salem incident was viewed as more than a routine maritime disaster by government officials who had access to classified information about regional political and military developments. Modern perspectives. Today, more than 4 decades after the MV Salem erupted in flames in the Arabian Sea, the fundamental questions surrounding her destruction remain unanswered. Advanced maritime investigation techniques, satellite surveillance, and improved international cooperation have made similar mysteries increasingly rare in modern shipping. Yet the Salem's fate continues to resist definitive explanation. Contemporary maritime security experts note that the complete destruction of a supertanker and the near-total loss of her crew would be extremely difficult to achieve through accidental means. Modern tanker safety systems, crew training protocols, and international oversight make catastrophic explosions like the one that consumed the Salem virtually impossible under normal operational circumstances. Yet the political environment of 1980, with its complex web of international tensions, covert operations, and regional conflicts, provided a context in which extraordinary events might have unfolded far from public scrutiny. The remote location of the disaster, in international waters far from immediate investigation, created conditions where evidence could be destroyed and questions left permanently unanswered. Secrets beneath the waves. The wreck of the MV Salem lies somewhere on the floor of the Arabian Sea. Her secrets preserved in the crushing depths where only the most sophisticated deep-sea exploration equipment might one day reach her. Until that day arrives, if it ever does, the mystery of what really happened aboard the burning tanker in January 1980 remains locked away with the 34 men who vanished without trace into the darkness of that Arabian night. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Salem mystery lies not in the questions about how she was destroyed, but in the complete silence that has surrounded those final moments when fire consumed everything and everyone aboard, leaving only one man to carry the burden of memories too terrible to fully explain, and too incomplete to provide the answers that justice demands. On a calm October morning in 1980, a merchant vessel loaded with 13,500 tons of corn departed Philadelphia bound for Egypt, carrying with her 34 souls and what would become one of the North Atlantic's most enduring maritime mysteries, a disappearance so complete that it would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about modern shipping disasters. From war to commerce. The SS Poet's story begins not in peacetime commerce, but in the crucible of World War II, when American shipyards worked around the clock to build the vessels that would carry supplies across submarine-infested oceans. Launched in 1944 from the Permanente Metals Corporation shipyard in Richmond, California, she emerged as hull number 2456, one of the thousands of Liberty ships that formed the backbone of Allied maritime logistics. At 441 feet in length and 7,176 gross tons, the Poet represented the triumph of American industrial efficiency over German U-boat warfare. Her welded steel construction, while revolutionary for its speed of assembly, incorporated design compromises that prioritized rapid production over longevity. These Liberty ships were famously described as being built for the duration of the war, plus 5 years few were expected to survive much longer in commercial service. After the war's end, the Poet joined the vast fleet of surplus military vessels converted to civilian use. Under various owners and names, she spent the following decades carrying bulk cargoes across the world's trade routes. By 1980, now owned by the Hawaiian Eugenia Corporation and operated under charter, the 36-year-old vessel had been thoroughly modernized with updated navigation equipment, radio systems, and safety gear that should have made her as secure as any merchant ship of her era. The final crew. Captain George Koutsarais, a 50-year-old Greek mariner with extensive experience commanding merchant vessels, took charge of the Poet for what would prove to be her final voyage. His crew of 33 represented the multicultural nature of modern shipping. Americans, Greeks, Koreans, and other nationalities who had signed aboard for the transatlantic run to Egypt's Port Said. Among the crew were experienced officers who had spent years navigating these same Atlantic shipping lanes, along with younger seamen for whom this voyage represented another step in their maritime careers. Chief Engineer John Banville, Radio Officer John Lawback, and the other department heads brought decades of combined experience to their responsibilities aboard the aging Liberty ship. The crew quarters had been updated with modern amenities, while the bridge featured navigation equipment that represented the latest in 1980 maritime technology. GPS was not yet widely available to civilian vessels, but the Poet carried multiple radio systems, radar, and traditional navigation instruments that should have enabled her officers to maintain contact with shore stations and handle any emergency that might arise during the Atlantic crossing. Departure from Philadelphia, October 24, 1980, dawned clear and cool along the Delaware River as the SS Poet completed her final preparations for departure. Her cargo holds were filled with 13,500 tons of yellow corn, a routine agricultural export bound for Egypt as part of international food aid programs. The loading had proceeded without incident, with stevedores working efficiently to fill the ship's 5 cargo holds with grain that would help feed populations thousands of miles away. Captain Kautsarais filed his sailing plan with maritime authorities, indicating an expected transit time of approximately 2 weeks for the 5,500-mile voyage to Port Said. The route would take the Poet northeast along the American coast before turning east across the Atlantic, following shipping lanes traveled safely by thousands of vessels over the decades since commercial aviation had reduced passenger traffic but left cargo shipping as busy as ever. Weather forecasts for the initial portion of the voyage showed typical autumn conditions for the North Atlantic: moderate temperatures, manageable sea states, and no severe storm systems threatening the shipping lanes. As the Poet's lines were cast off and her engines engaged for the journey down the Delaware River toward the open Atlantic, nothing suggested that this departure would be fundamentally different from the hundreds of similar voyages that had preceded it. Into the Atlantic. The SS Poet's progress during her first week at sea followed entirely normal patterns. Radio Officer Laubach maintained regular contact with coastal radio stations, transmitting routine position reports and weather observations as required by international maritime protocols. These communications, logged by shore-based operators, painted a picture of an uneventful voyage proceeding according to schedule across familiar waters. On October 26th, 2 days after departure, the Poet reported her position as approximately 600 miles northeast of Cape Hatteras, placing her on course and on schedule for her planned Atlantic crossing. Weather conditions in the area were described as moderate, with winds of 15-20 knots and sea states well within the capabilities of a properly maintained merchant vessel. This routine radio transmission would prove to be the last confirmed contact with the SS Poet. What happened in the following hours and days remains one of maritime history's most perplexing questions, as 34 human beings and their 7,000-ton vessel simply vanished from the surface of the earth without leaving a single trace of their fate. The silence. When the SS Poet failed to make her next scheduled radio contact on October 27th, initial concern was muted. Radio equipment failures were not uncommon aboard older merchant vessels, and experienced mariners knew that ships occasionally went silent for technical reasons before resuming normal communications. Shore-based operators noted the missed contact, but did not immediately raise alarms. By October 29th, however, the Poet's continued silence had triggered maritime search protocols. The U.S. Coast Guard initiated preliminary inquiries, attempting to contact other vessels in the area that might have observed the missing ship or received distress signals on emergency frequencies. These initial efforts revealed nothing. No other vessel reported seeing the Poet. No emergency beacons had been detected. No distress calls had been logged by any radio station along the Atlantic seaboard. The absence of any distress signal proved particularly puzzling to maritime authorities. The Poet carried multiple radio systems, including emergency equipment specifically designed to function even if main power failed. Modern merchant vessels of that era were required to maintain radio watches on international distress frequencies. making it extremely unlikely that a genuine emergency would go completely unreported. The search begins. By November 3rd, with the SS Poet now a week overdue for radio contact, the U.S. Coast Guard launched a full-scale search and rescue operation. Aircraft from Coast Guard stations along the eastern seaboard began systematic searches of the shipping lanes where the Poet should have been traveling, while naval vessels diverted from other duties to join the hunt for the missing merchant ship. The search area covered thousands of square miles of North Atlantic waters, from the Poet's last known position northeast of Cape Hatteras to points hundreds of miles further along her intended route. Coast Guard aircraft flew grid patterns at varying altitudes, their crews scanning the ocean's surface for any sign of wreckage, oil slicks, or the orange life rafts that modern merchant ships carried for emergency evacuation. Additional vessels joined the search as word spread through the maritime community. Other merchant ships altered their courses to pass through areas where the Poet might have drifted, if disabled, while fishing boats operating in the region kept watch for any debris that might have come from the missing vessel. The search represented one of the largest coordinated efforts in the North Atlantic since the final days of World War II. No trace, despite the extensive search operation, which continued for weeks and covered an area larger than many European countries. Searchers found absolutely nothing connected to the SS Poet. No wreckage, no life rafts, no personal effects. Not even the oil slick that typically marks the position where a large vessel has foundered. The complete absence of any physical evidence defied the normal patterns of maritime disasters and deepened the mystery surrounding the ship's fate. The search's failure to locate any trace of the Poet or her crew forced investigators to consider scenarios that challenged conventional understanding of how ships are lost at sea. Modern merchant vessels, even aging Liberty ships, typically leave some evidence when they founder debris fields, floating cargo, emergency equipment designed to deploy automatically when ships sink rapidly. Maritime experts noted that the Poet's cargo of grain, while heavy, would not necessarily prevent debris from surfacing if the ship had broken up on the surface. Corn kernels would float, as would numerous items from the ship's superstructure, crew quarters, and cargo holds. The total absence of such debris suggested either that the ship had sunk intact in very deep water or that some other catastrophic event had occurred. Theories from the deep. As the search operation wound down without success, investigators began developing theories to explain the Poet's disappearance. The most conventional explanation centered on structural failure. The possibility that the 36-year-old Liberty ship had suffered catastrophic hull failure that caused her to sink rapidly with all hands. Liberty ships were known to have developed stress cracks over time, and several had broken apart during severe weather conditions in previous decades. A second theory involved the ship's grain cargo. Bulk grain can shift dramatically in rough seas, potentially causing a vessel to lose stability and capsize quickly. If the Poet had encountered unexpectedly severe weather after her last radio contact, cargo shifting might have led to rapid capsizing that would have given the crew no time to send distress signals or launch survival equipment. More dramatic possibilities included rogue waves, single waves of extraordinary height that can appear suddenly in North Atlantic waters. Such a wave could theoretically overwhelm even a large merchant ship, driving her under before anyone could react. The complete absence of debris would be explained if the ship had been driven straight to the bottom by the wave's impact. A single clue. 3 years after the SS Poet's disappearance, beachcombers walking along the coast of Ireland discovered a single life preserver bearing the ship's name. This lone artifact, the only physical evidence ever found of the Poet's fate, raised as many questions as it answered. How had this single item traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic, while no other debris from the ship was ever recovered? The life preserver's discovery suggested that the Poet had indeed been lost somewhere in the North Atlantic, but its condition and location provided no clues about the circumstances of the ship's destruction. Maritime drift analysis indicated that the preserver could have originated from various points along the Poet's intended route, but the calculations were too imprecise to narrow the search area significantly. Modern perspective. Today, more than 4 decades after the SS Poet vanished into the North Atlantic, her fate remains as mysterious as ever. Advanced satellite tracking systems, emergency locator beacons, and improved international search coordination have made similar disappearances increasingly rare in modern merchant shipping. Yet the fundamental questions about what happened to the Poet and her 34-person crew remain unanswered. Contemporary maritime safety experts note that the complete loss of a merchant vessel without any distress signal or debris field would be virtually impossible under current international regulations. Modern ships carry multiple emergency communication systems, including satellite-based equipment that automatically transmits distress signals when vessels are in trouble. The Poet's disappearance occurred during a transitional period in maritime safety technology, when ships carried more sophisticated equipment than their World War II predecessors, but lacked the comprehensive safety systems required on today's vessels. This technological gap may partially explain how a ship could vanish so completely, but it cannot account for the total absence of physical evidence. The ocean keeps its secrets. Somewhere beneath the grey waters of the North Atlantic, the SS Poet rests with her cargo of grain and the 34 souls who trusted their lives to her aging hull. The precise location of their final resting place remains unknown, hidden in the ocean's vast darkness, where countless other vessels have found their graves over the centuries of human navigation. The mystery of the SS Poet serves as a reminder that even in our modern age of satellite communications and global positioning systems, the sea remains as capable of swallowing human ambitions without trace as it was in the days of wooden ships and iron men, leaving behind only questions that echo across the decades like foghorns calling through an endless night. In the winter of 1978, one of the most advanced cargo ships ever built set sail into a North Atlantic storm that would challenge everything maritime engineers believed about the limits of modern vessel design, and reveal that even the most sophisticated technology is no match for the ocean's ultimate fury, engineering excellence. The MS München emerged from the renowned Bremer Vulkan shipyard in West Germany in 1972, representing the pinnacle of contemporary maritime engineering. At 662 feet in length and 57,000 tons fully loaded, she was designed as a multi-purpose cargo vessel capable of carrying containers, heavy machinery, and bulk commodities across the world's most challenging shipping routes. Her sleek lines and towering superstructure spoke of German precision engineering applied to the demands of international commerce. Every aspect of the München's construction reflected lessons learned from decades of maritime disasters. Her hull was built with high-tensile steel, using advanced welding techniques that created seamless joints far stronger than traditional riveted construction. Multiple watertight bulkheads divided her interior into compartments that could be sealed independently, ensuring that flooding in one area would not necessarily doom the entire vessel. The ship's bridge, positioned high above the main deck, housed the most sophisticated navigation and communication equipment available in the mid-1970s. Multiple radar systems, radio transmitters, and emergency beacons were designed to function even under the most adverse conditions. Her crew quarters provided comfortable accommodations for the 28 officers and men who would call the München home during her voyages across the world's oceans. A routine December voyage, December 7th, 1978, found the MS München docked in Bremerhaven, preparing for what should have been a routine winter crossing to the United States. Her cargo holds were loaded with a mixed consignment of German-manufactured goods, heavy machinery, and containers bound for American ports. The loading process had proceeded smoothly, with the ship's sophisticated cargo handling systems making quick work of the diverse freight. Captain Gerd Klatt, a veteran mariner with extensive experience navigating North Atlantic winters, oversaw final preparations with the methodical attention to detail that had earned him respect throughout the German merchant marine. His crew of 27 represented some of the finest maritime professionals in West Germany, men whose training and experience should have been more than adequate to handle whatever challenges awaited them on the winter ocean. Weather forecasts for the initial portion of the voyage showed typical North Atlantic winter conditions, cold temperatures, moderate to heavy seas, and the possibility of developing storm systems as the ship moved into the open ocean. These conditions, while challenging, fell well within the operational parameters for which the München had been designed and her crew trained. Into the storm's path, the München departed Bremerhaven on schedule, her powerful diesel engines driving her steadily northwest toward the Atlantic shipping lanes. Captain Klatt's initial radio reports indicated normal progress, with the ship making good time despite increasingly rough seas as she moved away from the European continental shelf into deeper waters. By December 10th, the München was positioned approximately 600 miles southwest of Ireland, following the Great Circle route that would take her most efficiently across the North Atlantic to American ports. Weather conditions had deteriorated significantly, with storm systems moving through the area, bringing winds of 40-50 knots and seas building to heights that challenged even experienced merchant mariners. The ship's radio officer maintained regular contact with shore stations and other vessels, transmitting routine position reports and weather observations that painted a picture of increasingly difficult but still manageable conditions. These communications followed standard maritime protocols, with no indication of any problems beyond the normal challenges of winter navigation in one of the world's most demanding ocean environments. The last signal. At 1:52 a.m. on December 12, 1978, the MS München transmitted her final radio message, a routine position report, placing her approximately 450 miles northwest of the Azores in international waters. The transmission, received clearly by multiple shore stations, contained no indication of distress or unusual circumstances. Radio Officer Günther Bencher's calm professional delivery suggested that despite the severe weather conditions, the ship remained under full control of her experienced crew. This routine communication would prove to be the last confirmed contact with the München and her 28-person crew. What happened in the hours that followed remains one of maritime history's most perplexing mysteries, as one of the most modern and seaworthy vessels of her era simply vanished from the surface of the earth without leaving a distress signal or any clear indication of her fate. The absence of any emergency transmission proved particularly puzzling to maritime authorities. The München carried multiple radio systems, including emergency equipment designed to function automatically if the ship encountered serious difficulty. Her crew was trained in emergency procedures that emphasized the critical importance of transmitting distress signals at the first sign of serious trouble, when silence becomes alarm. By December 14th, when the München failed to make her next scheduled radio contact, maritime authorities in both Germany and the United States began preliminary inquiries. The ship's silence, while concerning, did not immediately trigger full-alarm radio equipment failures were not unknown, and experienced merchant mariners sometimes maintained radio silence during severe weather to concentrate on navigation and ship handling. However, as hours stretched into days without any word from the München, concern escalated rapidly. The ship's owners, the Hamburg America Line, initiated emergency procedures, attempting to contact other vessels in the area that might have observed the missing ship or received communications on emergency frequencies. These efforts revealed troubling silence. No other vessel reported any contact with the München after her final position report. By December 16th, with the ship now 4 days overdue for radio contact and showing no signs of arriving at her planned destination, full-scale search and rescue operations began. The timing was particularly unfortunate, as North Atlantic winter storms were reaching peak intensity, with multiple weather systems generating some of the worst sea conditions recorded in the region for decades. The search begins. Maritime rescue coordination centers in both Europe and North America launched one of the largest search operations ever conducted in the North Atlantic. Military and civilian aircraft from multiple nations began systematic searches of the shipping lanes where the München should have been traveling, while naval vessels and merchant ships diverted from their planned routes to join the hunt for the missing German vessel. The search area covered tens of thousands of square miles of storm-lashed ocean, with aircraft flying dangerous low-altitude missions through severe weather conditions that challenged even military crews trained for such operations. Surface vessels battled mountainous seas and hurricane-force winds as they methodically combed shipping lanes and drift areas where disabled vessels might have been carried by currents and storms. Weather conditions during the search were among the worst recorded in the North Atlantic during the winter of 1978-79. Meteorological data indicated that the region had been struck by a series of exceptionally violent storms, with wave heights exceeding 60 feet and sustained winds reaching hurricane force across large areas of ocean. These conditions severely hampered search operations and raised disturbing questions about what forces the München might have encountered. Fragments from the deep. After weeks of intensive searching, rescue teams began finding evidence of the München's fate scattered across hundreds of miles of Atlantic waters. The first discoveries came in late December, when aircraft spotted orange objects floating in heavy seas approximately 1,000 miles from the ship's last known position. Recovery operations, hampered by continuing severe weather, eventually identified these as lifeboats and life rafts from the missing vessel. The condition of the recovered survival equipment told a sobering story. The lifeboats showed evidence of catastrophic damage, with hull plates torn and twisted as if by enormous forces. None contained survivors or bodies, suggesting that whatever disaster had befallen the München had occurred with such violence and speed that the crew had been unable to launch emergency equipment in an orderly fashion. Additional debris recovered over the following months included sections of the ship's superstructure, cargo containers, and personal effects from crew members. Each piece of wreckage provided clues about the magnitude of the disaster, while raising new questions about how such extensive destruction could have occurred to a vessel designed to withstand the worst conditions the North Atlantic could produce. The physics of destruction. Maritime engineers and naval architects studying the recovered debris faced evidence that challenged their fundamental understanding of ship construction and the limits of structural design. The München had been built to withstand virtually any conditions that could reasonably be expected in North Atlantic service. Yet the wreckage suggested forces far beyond normal design parameters. Analysis of the twisted metal fragments indicated that the ship had been subjected to structural stresses equivalent to those that might be generated by a major explosion or collision with an immovable object. However, no evidence of fire, explosion, or collision with another vessel was found in the debris field. The damage appeared to have been caused by pure mechanical force, the ocean itself applying pressure that exceeded the ship's structural limits. Computer modeling of the storm conditions present when the München disappeared revealed wave patterns that might have generated the kind of catastrophic forces evident in the wreckage. Some meteorologists suggested that the ship had encountered a phenomenon known as a rogue wave, a single wave of extraordinary height and power that can appear suddenly even in severe but otherwise manageable storm conditions. Theories from the depths. The most widely accepted explanation for the München's loss centers on the concept of extreme wave encounters during the unprecedented storms of December 1978. Meteorological reconstructions suggest that the ship may have encountered waves exceeding 100 feet in height, mountains of water moving at tremendous speed across the storm-torn Atlantic. Such waves, while rare, can theoretically overwhelm even the largest and most well-designed vessels. If the München had encountered a rogue wave while already battling severe storm conditions, the combined forces might have exceeded her structural limits catastrophically. The speed of such an encounter would explain the absence of distress signals and the scattered condition of the wreckage. Alternative theories have focused on the possibility of cargo shifting during the storm, causing the ship to lose stability and roll beyond her recovery limits. a heavily loaded vessel encountering extreme wave conditions, might experience cargo movement that would compromise her ability to right herself, leading to rapid capsizing and structural failure as the ship was overwhelmed by succeeding waves. Modern perspectives. Today, more than 4 decades after the MS München vanished into the winter Atlantic, her fate continues to influence maritime safety regulations and ship design standards. The disaster prompted extensive research into extreme weather phenomena and their effects on large vessels, leading to improved understanding of rogue waves and other dangerous oceanographic conditions. Contemporary naval architecture incorporates lessons learned from the München and similar disasters, with modern ships designed to withstand wave forces that were barely understood in 1978. Advanced weather routing systems help vessels avoid the most dangerous storm conditions, while improved communication systems make it virtually impossible for ships to vanish as completely as the München did. Yet for all these advances, maritime experts acknowledge that the ocean retains the power to generate forces that can overwhelm human engineering. The München's fate serves as a reminder that even the most sophisticated technology is ultimately subject to natural forces that dwarf human capabilities. Echoes in the storm. Somewhere in the depths of the North Atlantic, the remains of the MS München rest with the 28 men who sailed her into that December storm 4 decades ago. The exact location of their final resting place remains unknown, hidden in the ocean's vast darkness, where countless other vessels have found their graves since humans first dared to challenge the sea's dominion. The München's legacy lives on in every winter crossing of the North Atlantic, in every storm warning that causes modern captains to alter course, and in every engineering calculation that tries to account for forces too vast and violent to fully comprehend, reminding us that beneath the ocean's deceptively familiar surface, there are powers that remain as mysterious and unforgiving today as they were when the first ships dared to venture beyond sight of land. In September 1980, the largest British merchant vessel ever built set course across the Pacific Ocean, carrying 158,000 tons of iron ore and 44 souls into the path of one of the most violent typhoons ever recorded, a rendezvous that would result in the greatest peacetime loss of a British merchant ship and launch one of the most exhaustive maritime investigations in history. Pride of British shipbuilding. The MV Derbyshire emerged from the renowned Swan Hunter shipyard on the River Tyne in 1976, representing the pinnacle of British maritime engineering. At 965 feet in length and 169,044 gross tons, she was not merely large, she was colossal, dwarfing even the great ocean liners of previous eras. Her massive bulk carrier design reflected the economics of 1970s international trade, where efficiency meant moving enormous quantities of raw materials across vast oceanic distances. Every aspect of the Derbyshire's construction spoke to British maritime expertise accumulated over centuries of ocean commerce. Her 9 cargo holds could accommodate nearly 170,000 tons of bulk cargo, while her 18-cylinder Sulzer diesel engine generated sufficient power to drive her massive displacement through the world's most challenging sea conditions. The ship's bridge, positioned nearly 100 feet above the waterline, commanded views that stretched to the horizon in all directions. The vessel's name honoured the English county of Derbyshire, though she would spend most of her operational life far from British waters, carrying raw materials along the great trade routes that connected resource-rich regions with industrial centres. Her crew accommodations, workshops, and cargo handling systems represented the most advanced technology available to merchant shipping in the late 1970s. A routine Pacific crossing, July 1980, found the MV Derbyshire in the Canadian port of Sept-Îles, Quebec, taking on a cargo of iron ore pellets bound for the steel mills of Japan. The loading process, which took several days to complete, filled her cavernous holds with 158,183 tons of iron ore payload that would generate substantial revenue for her owners while feeding Japan's industrial appetite for raw materials. Captain Geoffrey Underhill, a veteran British mariner with extensive experience commanding large bulk carriers, oversaw the loading operations with the methodical precision that had earned him respect throughout the international shipping community. His crew of 43 represented some of the finest maritime professionals from Britain and Hong Kong, men whose training and experience should have been more than adequate for the trans-Pacific voyage ahead. The Derbyshire's intended route would take her northeast through the St. Lawrence Seaway, across the North Atlantic to the English Channel, through the Mediterranean and Suez Canal, and finally across the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. This established shipping lane had been travelled safely by thousands of bulk carriers over the previous decades, making the voyage appear routine despite its 20,000-mile length into Pacific waters. By early September 1980, the Derbyshire had completed the first portion of her journey and entered the Pacific Ocean bound for Japan. Her progress across the vast Pacific had proceeded normally, with regular radio communications indicating smooth sailing, despite the seasonal threat of typhoons that made navigation in these waters challenging during late summer months. Weather forecasting in 1980, while significantly advanced from earlier decades, still relied primarily on surface observations and limited satellite data. Pacific typhoons were tracked and their general movements predicted, but the precise intensity and path of these massive storm systems often remained uncertain until they made landfall or affected shipping in their immediate vicinity. On September 8th, meteorological services began tracking a developing weather system in the western Pacific that would soon be designated Typhoon Orchid. Initial observations suggested a typical seasonal storm that would follow the usual northwesterly track toward the Asian mainland. However, Typhoon Orchid would prove to be anything but typical in its intensity and the destruction it would bring to vessels caught in its path. Into the storm's heart, the Derbyshire's final radio transmission, received on September 9, 1980, placed her approximately 230 miles southeast of Okinawa, directly in the path of Typhoon Orchid as it reached peak intensity. Radio Officer Stephen Reynoldson's final message was routine and professional, indicating the ship's position and weather conditions without any suggestion of distress or unusual circumstances. This transmission would prove to be the last confirmed contact with the Derbyshire and her 44-person crew. What happened in the hours that followed remains partially reconstructed from meteorological data and later wreck analysis, but the human experience of those final moments has been lost forever with the men who lived through the ship's encounter with one of the Pacific's most violent storms. Typhoon Orchid, as later analysis would reveal, had intensified into a super typhoon with sustained winds exceeding 150 miles per hour and wave heights that may have reached 100 feet or more. The storm's eye passed directly over or very near the Derbyshire's position, subjecting the massive vessel to forces that would challenge the limits of her structural design. The search, when the MV Derbyshire failed to arrive at her scheduled destination in Japan, maritime authorities initiated search operations that would eventually span months and cover vast areas of the Pacific Ocean. The initial search focused on the typhoon's track and areas where a disabled vessel might have drifted after encountering severe weather conditions. Aircraft from multiple nations joined the search, flying systematic patterns over thousands of square miles of Pacific waters. Surface vessels, including naval units and merchant ships, diverted from their planned routes to participate in what became one of the largest maritime search operations conducted in the Pacific since World War II. Despite these extensive efforts, searchers found no trace of the Derbyshire or her crew. No lifeboats, no debris field, no oil slick, nothing to indicate where or how Britain's largest merchant ship had met her fate. The complete absence of any physical evidence deepened the mystery and frustrated both investigators and the families of the missing crewmen. Years of uncertainty. For 14 years, the fate of the MV Derbyshire remained unknown. Theories abounded within the maritime community, ranging from catastrophic structural failure during the typhoon to scenarios involving cargo shifting that might have caused the ship to lose stability and capsize rapidly. The absence of any debris or survivors made definitive conclusions impossible, leaving investigators to speculate based on incomplete information. The Derbyshire's disappearance raised troubling questions about the safety of large bulk carriers, particularly those operating in severe weather conditions. Naval architects and maritime safety experts began examining whether existing design standards were adequate for vessels of such enormous size, operating in the world's most challenging environments. Insurance companies, shipping lines, and regulatory authorities all had substantial interests in determining what had happened to the Derbyshire. The financial implications of the loss, combined with concerns about similar vessels operating worldwide, created pressure for answers that remained frustratingly elusive as years passed without resolution. Discovery in the deep. In 1994, 14 years after the Derbyshire vanished, advanced deep-sea exploration technology finally located her remains on the Pacific Ocean floor at a depth of approximately 13,800 feet. The discovery, made possible by sophisticated sonar equipment and remotely operated vehicles, revealed the ship broken into two main sections separated by nearly half a mile on the abyssal plain. The wreck site told a story of catastrophic structural failure under extreme conditions. The Derbyshire had broken apart at sea, with her forward section, including the bridge and crew accommodations, separated from the after section containing the engine room and stern cargo holds. The condition and position of the wreckage provided crucial evidence about the sequence of events that led to her destruction. Examination of the wreck revealed that the ship's forward cargo holds had been breached, allowing massive quantities of seawater to enter while the vessel was still on the surface. The weight of water flooding into these forward compartments would have caused the ship's bow to sink deeper into the mountainous seas generated by Typhoon Orchid, subjecting the hull to stresses that exceeded her design limits. Lessons from the depths. The investigation into the Derbyshire's sinking revealed critical flaws in the design and construction standards applied to large bulk carriers in the 1970s. The ship's forward hatch covers, while adequate under normal conditions, proved vulnerable to the extreme forces generated by the typhoon's massive waves. Once these covers failed, the rapid flooding of cargo holds created conditions that no crew could have survived. Analysis of the wreckage led to substantial changes in international shipping regulations, particularly regarding the design and construction of bulk carriers. New standards for hatch cover strength, emergency procedures, and weather routing were implemented to prevent similar disasters. The Derbyshire's loss, while tragic, contributed to improved safety for subsequent generations of merchant mariners. The investigation also revealed the extraordinary violence of super typhoons and their potential impact on even the largest vessels. Computer modeling of the conditions present during Typhoon Orchid suggested wave heights and wind forces that challenged human comprehension, providing context for understanding how a ship the size of the Derbyshire could be overwhelmed and destroyed. Legacy in steel and memory. Today, more than 4 decades after the MV Derbyshire encountered Typhoon Orchid in the Western Pacific, her story continues to influence maritime safety standards and ship design protocols. The lessons learned from her loss have been incorporated into international regulations that govern the construction and operation of bulk carriers worldwide. Modern weather forecasting and routing systems help vessels avoid the most dangerous storm conditions, while improved communication systems ensure that ships in distress can summon assistance more effectively than was possible in 1980. Advanced hull monitoring systems can detect structural problems before they become catastrophic, providing early warning that might save both ships and lives. Yet for all these technological advances, the ocean retains its capacity to generate forces that can overwhelm human engineering. The Derbyshire's encounter with Typhoon Orchid serves as a reminder that beneath the Pacific's deceptively vast surface, there are powers that remain as unpredictable and unforgiving today as they were when the first humans dared to venture beyond sight of land. Echoes across the Pacific. The MV Derbyshire rests now in the eternal darkness of the Pacific depths, her broken hull a monument to the 44 men who sailed her into that September typhoon, and a testament to both the limits of human ambition and the ocean's ultimate dominion over all who venture upon its surface. Their story continues to resonate through every weather warning that causes modern captains to alter course, every engineering calculation that factors extreme conditions into design parameters, and every safety regulation that bears the invisible signature of lessons learned from those who went before, reminding us that the sea's capacity for both creation and destruction remains as profound and mysterious as the depths where the Derbyshire now lies silent, her secrets finally revealed, but her sacrifice eternally remembered. In the pristine waters of the Arctic Ocean, where ice floes shift like restless spirits and the sun disappears for months at a time, there drifts a vessel that has become one of maritime history's most enduring enigmas. A ship that has sailed unmanned for more than half a century, appearing and vanishing like a phantom across the world's most inhospitable waters. Birth of a trading vessel. The ship that would become legendary as the Beichimo began her life in 1914 at the Lindholmens Varv shipyard in Gothenburg, Sweden, emerging as the SS Ångermanälven, a sturdy 322-ton cargo steamer designed for harsh northern waters. At 230 feet in length, her ice-strengthened hull and powerful steam engine were built to navigate the challenging conditions of Scandinavian coastal waters during an era when maritime technology was rapidly advancing. Her construction incorporated design elements specifically intended for cold water operations, reinforced steel plating that could withstand ice pressure, heating systems to prevent freezing of essential equipment, and cargo holds designed to maintain stable temperatures for goods transported in extreme climates. The ship's builders could hardly have imagined that their creation would one day become the Arctic's most famous wanderer. In 1921, the Hudson's Bay Company acquired the vessel, recognizing her potential for Arctic trading operations. Renamed the SS Beichimo after Bailey Island in the Canadian Arctic, she was destined to spend the next decades carrying supplies to remote trading posts and returning south with valuable furs, ivory, and other Arctic commodities that connected indigenous communities with southern markets. Servant of the Arctic trade. For nearly 5 decades, the Beichimo faithfully served the Hudson's Bay Company's northern operations, becoming a familiar sight to Inuit communities scattered across the vast Canadian Arctic archipelago. Each summer, when ice conditions permitted, she would navigate the treacherous Northwest Passage, delivering essential supplies to isolated settlements and collecting the furs and raw materials that sustained the northern economy. Her annual voyages followed routes that challenged even the most experienced Arctic mariners. The Beichimo would thread her way through constantly shifting ice fields, navigate narrow channels between islands, and anchor in remote bays where indigenous trappers would arrive by kayak and dog sled to conduct trade. Her holds would gradually fill with Arctic fox pelts, seal skins, walrus ivory, and other valuable materials that justified the considerable expense and risk of Arctic commerce. Captain Sidney Cornwall and his experienced crew developed an intimate knowledge of Arctic conditions, learning to read ice formations, weather patterns, and seasonal changes that could mean the difference between successful voyage and disaster. The Beichimo's reputation for reliability made her an essential link between the outside world and communities that might otherwise remain completely isolated for most of each year. Trapped in ice. The year 1969 proved to be a turning point in the Beichimo's long career. During what was intended to be a routine trading voyage, the ship became trapped in heavy pack ice near the Beaufort Sea, approximately 300 miles southwest of Banks Island. Ice conditions that year were particularly severe, with massive floes forming barriers that proved impossible to navigate or break through with the ship's limited ice-breaking capabilities. As winter approached and temperatures plummeted, it became clear that the Beichimo would remain frozen in place until the following spring's thaw. This situation was not unprecedented. Arctic vessels regularly faced ice entrapment, and crews were prepared for extended periods trapped in the frozen wilderness. Supplies were adequate, and the ship's heating systems could maintain livable conditions through the harsh Arctic winter. However, as weeks turned to months, the Hudson's Bay Company made a fateful decision. Rather than commit resources to maintaining a crew aboard the icebound vessel through another Arctic winter, company officials ordered the Beichimo to be abandoned. The crew was evacuated by aircraft, leaving the ship locked in ice but otherwise intact. Her cargo holds empty, but her structure sound and her machinery preserved by the Arctic cold. The unmanned Voyager. What the Hudson's Bay Company could not have anticipated was that the Beichimo's story was far from over. When the ice finally broke up the following spring, the abandoned vessel did not sink or become wrecked on some remote shore. Instead, she began a remarkable journey that would span decades and capture the imagination of Arctic explorers, aviators, and mariners around the world. Free-floating in the Arctic Ocean's complex current systems, the Beichimo began an unmanned odyssey that defied conventional understanding of how abandoned vessels behave in extreme environments. Rather than succumbing to ice damage, storms, or mechanical failure, she appeared to thrive in conditions that regularly destroyed vessels with full crews and modern equipment. Her first post-abandonment sighting came in 1970, when a group of Inuit hunters reported seeing a large vessel drifting freely in the Beaufort Sea. Their description matched the Beichimo perfectly, confirming that the abandoned ship had survived her first winter alone and was now following the Arctic's mysterious current patterns across vast expanses of largely uncharted water. A pattern of appearances. Over the following decades, sightings of the unmanned Beichimo became a regular feature of Arctic exploration reports. Pilots flying supply missions to northern communities would radio excited reports of spotting a large vessel moving slowly through ice fields where no ship should have been operating. Research expeditions would encounter her drifting silently through remote waters, appearing suddenly out of Arctic fog like a maritime mirage. Each sighting followed a similar pattern. Observers would spot the distinctive silhouette of a steam-powered cargo vessel moving slowly but purposefully through waters where ice conditions made normal navigation extremely hazardous. Attempts to approach the ship would prove frustrating, as Arctic weather conditions, shifting ice, or equipment limitations would prevent close examination or boarding attempts. In 1975, a group of Inuit hunters reported seeing the Beichimo near Melville Island, over 1,000 miles from her original abandonment site. Subsequent sightings placed her at various locations throughout the Arctic archipelago, suggesting that she was following complex current patterns that carried her across vast distances while somehow avoiding the ice formations and storms that regularly claimed other vessels in these waters. The elusive prize. As reports of Beichimo sightings accumulated, the abandoned vessel began attracting serious attention from salvage operations and maritime enthusiasts. The prospect of recovering an intact Arctic vessel with nearly 6 decades of operational history sparked multiple organized attempts to locate and capture the wandering ship. In 1980, a team of researchers aboard the polar research vessel MV Pandora II managed to approach within several hundred yards of the Beichimo before ice conditions forced them to abandon their pursuit. Their photographs provided the clearest documentation yet of the ship's condition, revealing that despite a decade of unmanned drifting, her superstructure appeared remarkably intact, and her hull showed no obvious signs of critical damage. Subsequent expeditions faced similar frustrations. The Beichimo seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to evade capture, disappearing into fog banks, becoming trapped in ice formations that prevented approach, or simply vanishing beyond the horizon before pursuit vessels could close the distance. Each near capture added to her growing legend, while providing tantalizing evidence that the ghost ship remained afloat and navigable. Modern technology meets ancient mystery. The advent of satellite surveillance and GPS technology in the 1990s promised to finally solve the Beichimo mystery by providing precise tracking of her movements across Arctic waters. However, even sophisticated monitoring systems proved inadequate to the task of consistently locating a single vessel in the vast expanses of the Arctic Ocean. Satellite images occasionally captured objects that might have been the Beichimo, but the resolution and coverage limitations of early surveillance systems made positive identification extremely difficult. Ice formations, other vessels, and various floating debris created numerous false alarms that frustrated researchers attempting to establish definitive tracking data. Climate change began affecting Arctic ice patterns during this period, potentially altering the current systems that had carried the Beichimo for decades. Some researchers theorized that changing conditions might strand the vessel in new areas or expose her to different weather patterns that could finally end her remarkable journey. The last confirmed sighting. In September 2009, the research team aboard the MV Clipper Adventurer reported what appears to have been the last confirmed sighting of the SS Beichimo. The researchers observed a vessel matching the abandoned ship's description drifting slowly through ice fields near the Beaufort Sea, relatively close to her original abandonment site 40 years earlier. Attempts to approach the vessel were hampered by deteriorating weather conditions and the need to maintain the research vessel's schedule. By the time conditions improved sufficiently to permit a closer approach, the mysterious ship had vanished once again into the Arctic's maze of ice and fog, leaving behind only photographs and eyewitness accounts to document her continued existence. This 2009 sighting marked exactly 40 years since the Beichimo's abandonment, suggesting that the vessel had completed at least one full circuit of Arctic current systems during her unmanned odyssey. The longevity of her survival challenged conventional understanding of how steel vessels deteriorate in marine environments, particularly under the extreme conditions of Arctic waters. Contemporary search efforts. Modern expeditions continue to search for the elusive Beichimo, employing increasingly sophisticated technology in attempts to locate and document the world's most famous ghost ship. Underwater sonar systems, satellite tracking, and aerial reconnaissance missions have all been deployed in systematic searches of Arctic waters where the vessel might reasonably be expected to appear. The Alaskan government has officially designated the Beichimo as a historic vessel, while various maritime museums have expressed interest in recovering and preserving her should she ever be successfully located. These institutional interests reflect growing recognition that the abandoned ship represents a unique piece of Arctic maritime history that deserves protection and study. However, each technological advance seems to be matched by the Arctic's ability to conceal its secrets. Despite decades of increasingly sophisticated search efforts, the Beichimo continues to evade definitive location, appearing just often enough in reported sightings to maintain hope that she remains afloat somewhere in the vast expanses of polar waters. The legend endures today, more than 50 years after her abandonment in Arctic ice. The SS Beichimo has achieved legendary status as the ocean's most enduring ghost ship. Her story has inspired books, documentaries, and countless discussions among maritime enthusiasts who debate whether she could still be drifting somewhere in Arctic waters or has finally succumbed to the forces that eventually claim all vessels. The psychological appeal of the Beichimo legend speaks to humanity's fascination with the unknown and the romance of vessels that continue sailing long after their crews have departed. In an age of satellite tracking and global positioning systems, the existence of a ship that can simply vanish into the vastness of Arctic waters represents a connection to earlier eras when much of the ocean remained genuinely mysterious. Modern climate change has transformed many aspects of Arctic navigation, potentially affecting the current patterns and ice formations that sustained the Beijimo's decades-long journey. Some researchers suggest that these environmental changes might finally bring her odyssey to an end, while others argue that altered conditions could carry her into previously inaccessible areas where she might continue drifting for decades more, forever beyond the horizon, somewhere in the Arctic Ocean's pristine waters. Between the shifting ice floes and beneath the aurora-painted skies, the SS Beijimo may still be following currents that have carried her across half a century of solitary voyaging. A steel testament to human craftsmanship that has outlived its creators and continues writing its own story across the world's most forbidding waters, forever just beyond the reach of those who would solve the mystery of the Arctic's eternal wanderer. In the winter of 1872, a merchant brigantine was discovered, drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic Ocean, her sails partially set, her cargo intact, and her galley still stocked with provisions, yet not a single soul remained aboard to explain why 10 people had vanished without trace from a seaworthy vessel in calm waters, leaving behind one of maritime history's most enduring and baffling mysteries, birth of the Amazon. The vessel that would become infamous as the Mary Celeste began her existence in 1861 at the shipyard of Joshua Dewis in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia. Originally christened the Amazon, she emerged as a 282-ton brigantine measuring 103 feet in length, a modest but well-built merchant vessel designed for the coastal and transatlantic trade routes that connected North American ports with European markets. Her construction reflected the practical shipbuilding traditions of maritime Canada, with a sturdy oak frame, pine planking, and the two-masted brigantine rigging that provided an efficient balance between cargo capacity and sailing performance. The Amazon's design incorporated no unusual features or experimental elements. She was simply a reliable working vessel built to carry cargo safely across the often turbulent waters of the North Atlantic. The ship's early years proved troubled, marked by accidents, changes of ownership, and financial difficulties that seemed to plague her operations despite her sound construction. After running aground during her maiden voyage and experiencing several collisions and ownership transfers, the Amazon was eventually sold at auction and acquired by a consortium of American investors who renamed her the Mary Celeste in 1868, a new beginning. Under American ownership, the Mary Celeste underwent significant refurbishment that transformed her from a troubled vessel into what appeared to be a reliable merchant ship. Her new owners invested in modern equipment, updated her rigging, and enhanced her cargo handling capabilities to make her competitive in the growing trade between American ports and European markets. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a 37-year-old veteran mariner with an impeccable reputation for seamanship and integrity, took command of the Mary Celeste in 1872. Briggs was part owner of the vessel, having invested his own money in her operation, a financial commitment that underscored his confidence in the ship and his dedication to her success. Briggs represented the finest traditions of American merchant captains, deeply religious, professionally competent, and devoted to both his crew and his family. His decision to bring his wife Sarah and 2-year-old daughter Sophia aboard for the upcoming voyage to Italy reflected both his confidence in the ship's seaworthiness and his desire to combine business with family time, a common practice among merchant captains of the era. The final crew. The Mary Celeste's crew for her last voyage consisted of 7 experienced seamen, each carefully selected by Captain Briggs for their competence and reliability. First Mate Albert Richardson brought years of experience aboard merchant vessels, while the remaining crew members, Andrew Gilling, Volkert, and Boz Lorenzen, Arian Martins, and Gottlieb Goodshall, represented the international character of American merchant shipping, with backgrounds spanning multiple nationalities and maritime traditions. This crew assembled in New York during late October 1872, preparing for a voyage that should have been routine by the standards of transatlantic commerce. Their cargo consisted of 101 barrels of denatured alcohol consigned to H. Mascarenhas and Company in Genoa, Italy, a valuable but not particularly hazardous shipment that represented the kind of industrial chemicals regularly transported across the Atlantic. The loading process proceeded normally, with stevedores carefully stowing the alcohol barrels in the Mary Celeste's hold, according to established maritime safety practices. The cargo manifest and shipping documents were properly prepared, insurance arrangements completed, and all legal requirements satisfied for the upcoming transatlantic passage. Departure into mystery. November 7th, 1872, dawned clear and cold along the New York waterfront as the Mary Celeste prepared for departure. Captain Briggs completed his final inspections, ensured that all supplies and provisions were aboard, and said farewell to his 7-year-old son Arthur, who would remain in New York to continue his schooling while the family made the voyage to Italy. The ship's departure from New York appeared entirely routine to observers on the waterfront. Her sails were properly set, her crew efficiently handling the complex maneuvers required to navigate the busy harbor, and her progress down the harbor channel proceeded according to normal maritime protocols. Nothing about the Mary Celeste's departure suggested that this voyage would be fundamentally different from thousands of similar merchant crossings. Weather conditions for the initial portion of the voyage were favorable, with moderate winds and manageable sea states that allowed the heavily loaded brigantine to make good progress eastward across the Atlantic. Captain Briggs's navigation plan called for a direct route toward the Strait of Gibraltar, following established shipping lanes that had been traveled safely by countless vessels over the previous decades. A parallel journey. Remarkably, the Mary Celeste was not alone in her Atlantic crossing that November. Captain David Reed Morehouse, an old friend of Captain Briggs, commanded the brigantine Dei Gratia, which had departed New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste, with a cargo of petroleum bound for Gibraltar. The two captains had dined together before their respective departures, discussing their planned routes and the possibility of encountering each other during the Atlantic passage. This parallel voyage would prove crucial to the mystery that was about to unfold. The Dei Gratia followed a similar route across the Atlantic, maintaining the schedule that would place her approximately 1 week behind the Mary Celeste throughout the crossing. Neither captain could have imagined that their friendly dinner conversation would be their last meeting, or that Captain Morehouse would soon become the key witness to one of maritime history's greatest puzzles. Discovery in the Atlantic. December 4th, 1872, found the Dei Gratia approximately 400 miles east of the Azores, making steady progress through moderate Atlantic swells under partly cloudy skies. At approximately 1 p.m., Captain Morehouse's lookout reported a sail on the horizon, a brigantine proceeding on an erratic course that immediately attracted attention from the Dei Gratia's experienced crew. As the Dei Gratia closed distance with the mysterious vessel, Captain Morehouse recognized the distinctive lines and rigging of the Mary Celeste. However, something was clearly wrong with his friend's ship. Her course was erratic, some of her sails were missing or improperly set, and most troubling of all, no figures could be seen on her deck despite the perfect sailing conditions that should have required active crew attention. Attempts to hail the Mary Celeste produced no response. The ship continued her aimless wandering, responding only to wind and current, without any human guidance. Captain Morehouse ordered the Dei Gratia's boat lowered, and First Mate Oliver DeVoe led a boarding party across the choppy waters to investigate the silent brigantine. Aboard the abandoned ship, what DeVoe and his boarding party discovered aboard the Mary Celeste defied easy explanation. The ship was completely deserted, with no sign of the 10 people who should have been aboard. However, the vessel showed no evidence of violence, storm damage, or any other obvious cause for abandonment. Her cargo of alcohol barrels remained securely stowed, with only 9 barrels showing signs of leakage, hardly enough to create dangerous conditions. the ship's interior revealed a scene of orderly abandonment rather than panicked flight. Personal belongings remained in place, with Captain Briggs's watch hanging in his cabin and his wife's jewelry secure in their quarters. The galley still contained provisions and cooking utensils, while the crew's quarters showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Most puzzling was the condition of the ship's navigational equipment and documentation. The ship's chronometer, sextant, and other navigation instruments were missing, along with the ship's boat and most of the life preservers. The ship's log ended abruptly on November 25th, placing the Mary Celeste near the island of St. Mary in the Azores, but providing no clue about subsequent events. The salvage operation Captain Morehouse faced a complex decision regarding the abandoned Mary Celeste. Under maritime law, his crew could claim salvage rights to the vessel and her cargo, but this would require dividing his already small crew to provide sufficient men to sail both ships to the nearest port. After careful consideration, he assigned First Mate DeVoe and 2 seamen to the Mary Celeste, while continuing toward Gibraltar aboard the Dei Gratia. The voyage to Gibraltar proceeded without major incident, though DeVoe and his skeleton crew found the Mary Celeste challenging to handle with only 3 men aboard a vessel designed for a crew of 8. Their successful navigation of the abandoned ship into Gibraltar Harbour on December 13, 1872, marked the beginning of extensive legal proceedings that would examine every aspect of the mystery. British Admiralty officials in Gibraltar immediately impounded both vessels pending a thorough investigation into the circumstances of the Mary Celeste's abandonment. The inquiry would examine evidence ranging from the condition of the ship's cargo to theories about the fate of Captain Briggs and his crew, generating thousands of pages of testimony that failed to provide definitive answers to the fundamental questions surrounding the mystery. Theories and speculation. The Gibraltar Admiralty Court heard extensive testimony from maritime experts, cargo specialists, and the crew of the Dei Gratia, but reached no firm conclusions about what had caused the Mary Celeste's abandonment. The court's proceedings generated numerous theories that attempted to explain the disappearance of 10 people from a seaworthy vessel in apparently calm conditions. Some investigators suggested that fears of an explosion from the alcohol cargo might have prompted Captain Briggs to order temporary abandonment of the ship. The denatured alcohol, while not as volatile as pure ethanol, could theoretically generate dangerous vapors under certain conditions. However, the lack of evidence for any explosion or fire damage made this explanation problematic. Other theories focused on the possibility of mutiny or piracy, though the lack of violence evidence and the presence of valuable cargo and personal belongings argued against these scenarios. The crew's wages remained aboard the ship, along with Captain Briggs's money and his wife's jewelry items that would certainly have been taken by mutineers or pirates. Natural phenomena provided another category of explanation, with some experts suggesting that the Mary Celeste might have encountered a waterspout or other severe weather condition that prompted abandonment. However, the ship's good condition and the absence of storm damage made such theories difficult to support with physical evidence. The enduring mystery. More than 150 years after the Mary Celeste was found drifting empty in the Atlantic, her story continues to fascinate researchers, maritime historians, and mystery enthusiasts worldwide. The case has generated countless books, articles, and fictional adaptations, each attempting to solve a puzzle that has resisted definitive explanation despite extensive investigation. Modern forensic techniques and improved understanding of maritime disasters have been applied to the Mary Celeste evidence, but these contemporary analyses have failed to provide conclusive answers to the fundamental questions about the fate of Captain Briggs, his family, and crew. The mystery remains as compelling today as it was to the Victorian investigators who first examined the abandoned brigantine in Gibraltar Harbour. The Mary Celeste's legacy extends beyond her specific mystery to encompass broader questions about the limits of human knowledge, and the ocean's capacity to conceal its secrets. In an age when satellite tracking and global communications make it virtually impossible for vessels to vanish without trace, the story of 10 people who simply disappeared from a seaworthy ship serves as a reminder of earlier eras when the sea held mysteries that human investigation could not penetrate. Echoes across time. The Mary Celeste was eventually released from Admiralty custody and returned to commercial service, but her reputation as a cursed or unlucky vessel followed her through subsequent years of operation under various owners. She was finally wrecked deliberately in 1885 as part of an insurance fraud scheme, bringing an ignoble end to a ship whose mystery had already secured her place in maritime legend. Today, the story of the Mary Celeste continues to inspire new theories and investigations, while serving as perhaps the ultimate example of how the ocean can transform routine voyage into enduring mystery. Her tale reminds us that even in our modern world of comprehensive surveillance and instant communication, there remain questions that resist easy answers, secrets that the sea guards as jealously today as it did on that December afternoon in 1872, when 10 souls vanished without trace into the vast indifference of the Atlantic, leaving behind only an empty ship and a mystery that time itself seems powerless to solve. In the crystal-clear waters off Australia's Great Barrier Reef, where coral gardens attract divers from around the world and gentle trade winds promise perfect sailing conditions, a luxury catamaran was discovered drifting aimlessly with her engines running, her table set for lunch, and her GPS still plotting a course. Yet her 3-man crew had vanished without trace, leaving behind one of modern Australia's most perplexing maritime mysteries, a dream vessel. The MV Kaz II represented everything desirable in contemporary recreational boating when she was launched in the early 2000s. This sleek 40-foot catamaran embodied the pinnacle of Australian yacht design, with twin hulls that provided exceptional stability, spacious living quarters that rivaled luxury apartments, and modern navigation equipment that should have made coastal cruising both safe and enjoyable. Her construction incorporated advanced materials and engineering principles developed over decades of competitive yacht racing. The catamaran's lightweight yet strong composite hull could slice through moderate seas with minimal motion, while her twin diesel engines provided reliable propulsion, and her sophisticated electronic suite offered navigation capabilities that would have seemed impossible to mariners of previous generations. The vessel's interior featured comfortable sleeping quarters for 6, a fully equipped galley, and a main saloon with panoramic windows that showcased the spectacular coastal scenery of northeastern Australia. Air conditioning, refrigeration, and entertainment systems provided all the amenities expected by recreational boaters seeking extended cruising adventures along one of the world's most beautiful coastlines. 3 friends and a dream voyage. In April 2007, 3 longtime friends prepared to embark on what should have been the recreational sailing adventure of a lifetime. Derek Batten, a 56-year-old experienced sailor, had planned an extended cruise along Queensland's coast with his companions Peter Tunstead, 69, and Peter's nephew James Tunstead, 35. The trio represented different generations united by their love of sailing and their desire to explore the pristine waters of the Great Barrier Reef region. Derek Batten brought decades of sailing experience to the expedition, having navigated these coastal waters numerous times in previous years. His knowledge of local conditions, combined with the Kaz II's modern safety equipment and navigation systems, should have provided more than adequate preparation for the planned cruise from Airlie Beach northward along the Queensland coast. The 3 men's friendship extended back many years, with shared sailing experiences that had built mutual trust and confidence in their ability to handle the challenges of coastal cruising. Their planned itinerary would take them through some of Australia's most spectacular marine environments, with opportunities for fishing, diving, and exploring remote anchorages far from the crowds of popular tourist destinations. Departure from Airlie Beach. April 15, 2007, dawned clear and warm along the Whitsunday coast as the CAS 2 prepared for departure from Airlie Beach, one of Queensland's premier yachting destinations. The marina bustled with typical weekend activity as recreational sailors prepared their vessels for cruises, ranging from day trips to extended voyages among the reef's countless islands and protected anchorages. The CAS 2's departure appeared entirely routine to observers in the marina. Her crew completed normal pre-departure procedures, checked weather forecasts that promised favorable conditions, and filed a float plan indicating their intention to cruise northward along the coast. Nothing about their preparation or departure suggested any concerns about the vessel's condition or the crew's readiness for the planned voyage. Weather conditions for the initial portion of their cruise were ideal, with moderate trade winds, calm seas, and clear skies that provided excellent visibility across the reef's intricate network of coral formations and navigational hazards. The CAS 2's twin engines and shallow draft made her well suited for navigating the reef's protected waters, while her modern electronics should have provided precise navigation guidance through areas where accurate position keeping was essential for safety. Into reef waters. The Great Barrier Reef represents one of the world's most complex marine environments, with thousands of individual coral formations creating a maze of channels, lagoons, and protected anchorages that can challenge even experienced navigators. However, the reef's inner waters also provide some of the most sheltered cruising grounds available to recreational sailors. With natural protection from ocean swells and predictable wind patterns that make coastal sailing relatively straightforward. Modern navigation equipment, including GPS systems and electronic charts, has greatly simplified reef navigation compared to the traditional dead reckoning techniques used by earlier generations of mariners. The CAS 2 carried comprehensive navigation electronics that should have provided continuous position information and collision avoidance data to help her crew navigate safely through the reef's intricate geography. For the first 3 days of their cruise, the CAS 2's progress appeared normal based on subsequent analysis of her GPS track logs. The vessel followed a logical northward route, anchoring in protected bays and maintaining speeds consistent with recreational cruising rather than any kind of emergency or distress situation. The Discovery, April 18, 2007, brought perfect sailing conditions to the Great Barrier Reef region as multiple vessels took advantage of calm winds and clear skies for recreational activities ranging from fishing to diving. Among these was a rescue helicopter conducting routine coastal patrols when crew members spotted an unusual sight approximately 80 nautical miles northwest of Townsville. The CAS 2 was drifting slowly with the current, her twin engines running, but her vessel clearly not under human control. The catamaran's erratic movement pattern immediately attracted the helicopter crew's attention, as experienced search and rescue personnel recognized behavior inconsistent with normal recreational sailing activities. Initial aerial observation revealed no signs of crew activity aboard the drifting catamaran. Her decks appeared empty, with no figures visible in the cockpit or main saloon areas where crew members would normally be stationed during daylight hours. The helicopter crew attempted radio contact on standard maritime frequencies, but received no response from the apparently abandoned vessel. Boarding the ghost yacht. When Australian water police boarded the drifting CAS 2 later that day, they encountered a scene that defied easy explanation. The catamaran appeared to be in perfect operating condition, with both engines running normally, electronics functioning properly, and all safety equipment in its designated location. Yet the 3 men who should have been aboard had vanished completely. The vessel's interior revealed signs of recent occupation that made the crew's absence even more mysterious. The main saloon table was set for a meal, with plates, cutlery, and food, suggesting that lunch preparation had been interrupted suddenly. A laptop computer remained open and running, displaying weather information that indicated the crew had been monitoring conditions as recently as the day of the yacht's discovery. Personal belongings remained undisturbed throughout the vessel. Clothing, cameras, and other valuables were found in their expected locations, with no evidence of hasty departure or any kind of struggle. The crew's wallets, containing cash and credit cards, remained aboard along with other items that would certainly have been taken if the men had planned to abandon the vessel. The life jacket clue. Perhaps most puzzling was the discovery of a single life jacket floating in the water near the drifting catamaran. The jacket showed no signs of damage or unusual wear, yet its presence in the water suggested that at least one of the 3 crew members had entered the ocean at some point during the mysterious sequence of events that led to their disappearance. The life jacket's condition provided few clues about the circumstances of its deployment. It appeared to have been properly fastened when worn, suggesting deliberate rather than accidental activation of its safety features. However, the absence of any other debris or evidence in the surrounding water made it impossible to determine when or why the jacket had been deployed. Water police investigators noted that the jacket was found relatively close to the drifting yacht, suggesting that whatever had occurred had happened recently rather than days earlier. The item's buoyancy and the local current patterns indicated that it had not drifted far from its point of entry into the water. The vessel's final hours. Analysis of the CAS-2's electronic systems revealed that her GPS unit had continued tracking the vessel's position throughout the period when her crew disappeared. This data showed that the catamaran had been anchored in a protected bay on the evening of April 17th, but had begun drifting sometime during the early morning hours of April 18th. The GPS track indicated that the vessel had dragged anchor and drifted with wind and current for several hours before being discovered by the rescue helicopter. This timeline suggested that whatever had happened to the 3 crew members had occurred during the night or very early morning hours, when visibility would have been limited. Weather conditions during this crucial period were mild, with light winds and calm seas that posed no obvious threat to an anchored vessel or her crew. The absence of any storm activity or other adverse conditions made the crew's disappearance even more difficult to explain through conventional maritime emergency scenarios. The investigation begins. Australian authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the CAS-2 incident, employing resources ranging from underwater search teams to forensic specialists examining every aspect of the vessel's condition and equipment. The investigation represented one of the most thorough examinations ever conducted into a recreational boating incident, yet failed to provide definitive answers about the fate of the 3 missing men. Search and rescue operations covered thousands of square miles of ocean surrounding the discovery site, using aircraft, surface vessels, and sophisticated sonar equipment to scan for any trace of the missing crew. Despite extensive efforts that continued for weeks, no bodies, additional life jackets, or other evidence was recovered from the search area. Forensic examination of the CAS-2 revealed no evidence of violence, mechanical failure, or any other obvious cause for the crew's disappearance. The vessel's safety equipment was complete and properly stowed. Her engines were in good operating condition, and her navigation systems had functioned normally throughout the voyage. Theories and questions. The absence of any clear evidence about the crew's fate generated numerous theories attempting to explain how 3 experienced men could vanish from a modern yacht in calm conditions. Some investigators suggested that one crew member might have fallen overboard accidentally, prompting the others to attempt a rescue that went tragically wrong. This scenario could potentially explain the single life jacket found in the water, as well as the absence of any distress signal from the vessel's sophisticated communication equipment. However, the theory required multiple coincidences and decisions that seemed inconsistent with normal maritime safety practices, followed by experienced sailors. Other explanations focused on possible medical emergencies or other sudden incapacitations that might have affected all 3 crew members simultaneously. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the vessel's engines or generators was considered, though tests of the yacht's ventilation systems revealed no obvious sources of dangerous gas accumulation. The possibility of deliberate abandonment was also examined, though investigators found no evidence of personal or financial difficulties that might have motivated such drastic action. The crew members' personal effects and the vessel's valuable equipment remaining aboard argued against any planned disappearance scenario. Modern mystery. The MV Kaz-2 incident occurred in an era of comprehensive satellite surveillance, GPS tracking, and sophisticated communication systems that should have made such complete disappearances virtually impossible. Yet despite all the technological advantages available to modern mariners, 3 experienced sailors vanished as completely as crews from maritime mysteries of previous centuries. The case highlighted limitations in even the most advanced safety systems when human beings simply disappear without activating emergency equipment or following established distress procedures. Modern electronics could track the vessel's position precisely and maintain detailed logs of her movements, but could not explain why her crew was no longer aboard. Contemporary search and rescue capabilities, while far superior to those available in earlier eras, proved inadequate to locate any trace of the missing men, despite extensive operations covering vast areas of ocean. The incident demonstrated that even in Australian coastal waters, with their relatively heavy marine traffic and comprehensive patrol coverage, people could still vanish without leaving recoverable evidence. The ocean's secret. Today, more than 15 years after the MV Kaz-2 was discovered, drifting unmanned off the Great Barrier Reef, the fate of Derek Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead remains unknown. Their disappearance stands as one of Australia's most perplexing maritime mysteries, defying explanation despite extensive investigation using the most advanced forensic techniques available. The case continues to influence recreational boating safety discussions throughout Australia, with authorities emphasising the importance of emergency communication procedures and safety equipment deployment. However, these practical considerations cannot address the fundamental mystery of how 3 people simply vanished from a vessel that showed no signs of distress or emergency. The pristine waters of the Great Barrier Reef continue to attract recreational sailors from around the world, offering some of the planet's most spectacular cruising grounds under generally benign conditions. Yet the story of the Kaz-2 serves as a sobering reminder that even in these familiar and well-travelled waters, the ocean retains its ancient capacity to pose questions that human investigation cannot answer. Echoes on the reef. The MV Kaz-2 was eventually returned to commercial service after extensive examination, but her brief career as Australia's most famous ghost yacht had already secured her place in maritime legend. Somewhere in the coral gardens and azure waters off Queensland's coast, 3 friends began a sailing adventure that transformed from routine recreational cruise into enduring mystery, leaving behind only questions that drift as persistently through the years as their abandoned catamaran once drifted through the reef's protected waters, carrying secrets that the coral sea guards as jealously as any treasure buried in its sandy depths. On a fog-shrouded morning in January 1921, lighthouse keepers scanning the treacherous waters off Cape Hatteras spotted the ghostly silhouette of a 5-masted schooner hard aground on Diamond Shoals, her white sails billowing in the wind and her decks completely deserted. Launching an investigation that would captivate the nation and remain unsolved for more than a century. Birth of a giant. The Carroll A. Deering emerged from the renowned G.G. Deering Company shipyard in Bath, Maine, in 1919, representing the final flowering of America's great age of commercial sailing vessels. At 255 feet in length and displacing 2,114 tons, she was among the largest 5-masted schooners ever built, her towering masts capable of carrying over 11,000 square feet of canvas that could drive her massive hull through the water at remarkable speeds. Named after the son of company founder Captain William H. Deering, The vessel embodied the shipbuilding expertise that had made Maine's Bath Iron Works region famous throughout the maritime world. Her construction incorporated traditional schooner design, refined over centuries of American coastal commerce, with innovations that allowed a relatively small crew to handle her enormous sail plan efficiently. The Deering's cargo capacity exceeded 4,000 tons, making her capable of carrying massive loads of coal, lumber, or other bulk commodities along the eastern seaboard and to international destinations. Her design represented an attempt to maintain sailing ship economics in an era when steam-powered vessels were increasingly dominating maritime commerce, combining the fuel efficiency of wind power with the cargo capacity needed to remain profitable. Captain Wormel takes command. For her final voyage, the Carroll A. Deering was placed under the command of Captain Willis B. Wormel, a 66-year-old veteran mariner with 46 years of experience commanding sailing vessels along the American coast and throughout the Caribbean. Wormel had originally been scheduled to retire, but agreed to take on one final command when the ship's regular captain fell ill just before departure. Captain Wormel assembled a crew of 10 experienced sailors for the planned voyage from Norfolk, Virginia to Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal, followed by a return journey carrying lumber back to American ports. The crew included First Mate Charles B. McClellan, a competent officer who had previously served under various captains in the Atlantic coastal trade. However, tensions arose almost immediately between Captain Wormel and his first mate. McClellan, described by observers as an aggressive and possibly unstable individual, openly questioned the captain's decisions and created an atmosphere of discord that troubled other crew members. These personality conflicts would later assume significant importance in theories about the ship's ultimate fate. The troubled voyage south. The Carroll A. Deering departed Norfolk on August 9, 1920, bound for Rio de Janeiro with her cargo of Virginia coal. The early stages of the voyage proceeded normally, with the massive schooner making good time down the Atlantic coast towards South American waters. Captain Wormel maintained regular communication with shore stations and other vessels, reporting normal progress and weather conditions. However, problems began to emerge as the voyage continued. When the Deering stopped in Barbados for supplies and water during the southbound passage, local authorities noted unusual behavior among crew members. Reports from Barbados suggested that First Mate McClellan had made inflammatory statements about Captain Wormel's competence and had even threatened the captain's authority in front of other crew members. More troubling were reports that McClellan had been observed meeting with suspicious individuals in Barbados who were not connected with normal maritime commerce. Some witnesses later claimed that these meetings involved discussions of the Deering's cargo and destination, though the significance of these encounters would only become apparent after subsequent events unfolded. Rio de Janeiro and the return journey. The Carroll A. Deering arrived in Rio de Janeiro in September 1920, where she discharged her coal cargo and began loading lumber for the return voyage to the United States. The loading process proceeded normally, with Brazilian port authorities noting no unusual incidents involving the vessel or her crew during their stay in the busy South American port. However, Captain Wormel's health began deteriorating during the stay in Rio. The 66-year-old captain, already stressed by the ongoing conflicts with his first mate and the demanding nature of commanding such a large sailing vessel, developed what appeared to be serious kidney problems that required medical attention. His condition became sufficiently serious that he was hospitalized briefly before the ship's departure. Despite his health issues, Captain Wormel insisted on completing the voyage rather than seeking replacement or medical leave. The Deering departed Rio de Janeiro in December 1920 with her cargo of lumber, beginning the return journey that would take her along the South American coast, through the Caribbean, and back to American waters. The final sightings. On January 23, 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was sighted passing Cape Lookout, North Carolina, by the lighthouse keeper, who noted that she appeared to be making good progress northward along the coast. This sighting placed the schooner approximately 50 miles south of Cape Hatteras, following the normal shipping route that would take her toward her intended destination. Later that same day, the lightship Cape Lookout reported another significant sighting of the Deering. According to the lightship's crew, a man they assumed to be an officer from the schooner hailed them through a megaphone, reporting that the ship had lost her anchors and requesting that the lightship relay this information to the ship's owners. The message was duly transmitted, though it would later be discovered that this was the last confirmed communication from anyone aboard the Carroll A. Deering. What made this final communication particularly significant was the lightship crew's later testimony that the man who hailed them did not appear to be Captain Wormel, whom some of the lightship personnel knew by sight from previous encounters. This observation would fuel speculation that by January 23rd, the Deering was no longer under her captain's command, grounded on Diamond Shoals. January 31, 1921, dawned grey and cold along the outer banks of North Carolina as Cape Hatteras lighthouse keeper observed a large sailing vessel hard aground on the notorious Diamond Shoals. The shoals, extending several miles southeast of Cape Hatteras, had been claiming vessels for centuries and were considered among the most dangerous navigational hazards along the Atlantic coast. The grounded vessel was quickly identified as the Carroll A. Deering, her 5 masts and distinctive profile making identification certain despite the distance and challenging weather conditions. Coast Guard personnel noted that the ship appeared intact structurally, with no obvious signs of collision damage or storm-related destruction that might explain her grounding. Most significantly, no signs of human activity could be observed aboard the stranded schooner. Her decks appeared deserted, with no crew members visible, despite the fact that a grounding on Diamond Shoals would normally require all hands on deck attempting damage control and rescue operations. The abandoned giant. When Coast Guard personnel finally managed to board the Carroll A. Deering several days later, they found a vessel that appeared to have been systematically abandoned by her entire crew. All 11 men who had sailed from Rio de Janeiro had vanished without trace, leaving behind a seaworthy ship that showed no signs of distress, violence, or emergency conditions that would normally prompt crew abandonment. The ship's lifeboats were missing, along with all navigation equipment including chronometers, sextants, and charts. Personal belongings had been removed from crew quarters, though some items of clothing and personal effects remained scattered throughout the vessel. The galley showed signs of recent meal preparation, with food still in cooking pots, and the ship's stores largely intact. Perhaps most puzzling was the condition of the ship's cargo. The lumber from Rio remained properly stowed and secured, showing no signs of the shifting or damage that might occur during severe weather or emergency maneuvers. The vessel's rigging was intact, her sails properly furled, and her machinery in good working condition. The investigation begins. The Carroll A. Deering case immediately attracted national attention, prompting one of the most extensive maritime investigations ever undertaken by United States authorities. The Department of Commerce, the FBI, and Naval Intelligence all participated in efforts to determine what had happened to the 11 missing men and why the ship had been abandoned in apparently good condition. Investigators faced the immediate challenge of explaining how an experienced crew could vanish completely from a seaworthy vessel without leaving any clear evidence of their fate. The missing lifeboats suggested that the crew had deliberately abandoned ship, but the circumstances that would prompt such drastic action remained mysterious. The investigation quickly focused on several key areas of inquiry. The personality conflicts between Captain Wormel and First Mate McClellan raised questions about possible mutiny, while reports of McClellan's suspicious contacts in Barbados suggested potential involvement with criminal elements operating in Caribbean waters. Theories and speculation. The most widely discussed theory centered on mutiny led by First Mate McClellan. According to this scenario, The aggressive first mate had orchestrated a crew rebellion against Captain Wormel, possibly motivated by disputes over the ship's route, cargo, or command decisions. The mutineers might then have murdered the captain and loyal crew members before abandoning the ship to avoid prosecution. However, the mutiny theory faced significant challenges. No evidence of violence was found aboard the Deering, and it seemed unlikely that mutineers would abandon a valuable vessel and cargo rather than attempting to sell them for profit. Additionally, the systematic removal of navigation equipment suggested planning that went beyond spontaneous rebellion. Piracy provided another explanation that gained considerable attention from investigators. The Caribbean and Western Atlantic were known to harbor criminal elements who preyed on merchant shipping, and the Deering's valuable lumber cargo would have been attractive to such groups. Pirates might have boarded the ship at sea, murdered or captured the crew, and then abandoned the vessel when grounding on Diamond Shoals made it impossible to salvage the cargo. More exotic theories emerged as the investigation continued without producing definitive answers. Some suggested that the Deering had been involved in rum-running activities during Prohibition, while others proposed that foreign agents had seized the ship for unknown purposes. The lack of conclusive evidence allowed speculation to flourish, with each theory finding supporters among investigators and the general public. The rum-running connection. The investigation took a dramatic turn when authorities discovered potential connections between the Deering case and Prohibition-era smuggling operations. The 1920s marked the height of illegal alcohol importation into the United States, with criminal organizations operating sophisticated networks of vessels that transported liquor from Caribbean sources to American markets. Some investigators theorized that the Carroll A. Deering had been hijacked by rum runners who needed a large, seaworthy vessel for their operations. According to this scenario, criminals had boarded the schooner at sea, eliminated her crew, and used the ship for smuggling operations before abandoning her when law enforcement pressure became too intense. This theory gained credibility when investigators discovered that several other vessels had disappeared under mysterious circumstances in the same general area during late 1920 and early 1921. The pattern suggested possible systematic targeting of merchant ships by criminal organizations seeking vessels for illegal activities. Government secrets. As the investigation deepened, some researchers began to suspect that government agencies were withholding information about the Deering case. References in partially declassified documents suggested that naval intelligence had taken particular interest in the ship's disappearance, possibly because of suspected foreign involvement or connections to national security matters. The post-World War I period was marked by international tensions and concerns about foreign espionage activities targeting American shipping and maritime facilities. Some theories propose that the Carroll A. Deering had been seized by foreign agents seeking to obtain intelligence about American shipping routes, cargo patterns, or port security measures. However, government secrecy also fueled speculation that the ship had been involved in covert activities that authorities preferred to keep hidden from public scrutiny. The lack of definitive official explanations for the crew's disappearance created an information vacuum that allowed conspiracy theories to proliferate. The final verdict, after months of intensive investigation involving multiple government agencies and hundreds of interviews with maritime personnel, port officials, and potential witnesses, authorities reached no definitive conclusions about the Carroll A. Deering's fate. The official investigation was eventually closed without determining what happened to Captain Wormel and his 10 crew members. The lack of resolution frustrated investigators and families of the missing men, while capturing public imagination in ways that ensured the case would be remembered long after other maritime mysteries were forgotten. The Carroll A. Deering had achieved a unique place in American maritime history as perhaps the most thoroughly investigated yet ultimately unexplained disappearance of the early 20th century. Modern perspectives. Today, more than a century after the Carroll A. Deering was found abandoned on Diamond Shoals. Maritime historians and mystery enthusiasts continue to debate the various theories that might explain her crew's disappearance. Advances in forensic science and historical research have provided new tools for examining old evidence, yet definitive answers remain elusive. The case represents a fascinating intersection of legitimate maritime commerce, Prohibition-era criminal activity, post-war international tensions, and the enduring human fascination with unsolved mysteries. Each generation of researchers has approached the evidence with fresh perspectives, yet the fundamental questions about 11 missing men remain as compelling today as they were to investigators in 1921. Contemporary analysis suggests that the most likely explanation involves some combination of criminal activity and crew conflict, possibly related to the lucrative rum-running operations that flourished during the early 1920s. However, the absence of definitive physical evidence means that the Carroll A. Deering secrets remain locked away in the depths of history. Legacy of mystery. The Carroll A. Deering herself was eventually salvaged and broken up, her valuable lumber cargo recovered, and her massive hull dismantled by salvage crews who found no additional clues about her crew's fate. Yet the mystery she represents continues to sail through American maritime folklore, as enduring and elusive as any ghost ship that has ever haunted the imagination of those who go down to the sea. Somewhere in the archives of government agencies and maritime organizations, there may still exist documents that could illuminate what happened to Captain Wormel and his crew during those final days of January 1921. Evidence that might finally explain how 11 experienced sailors vanished so completely from their floating world that even the ocean itself seems to have forgotten where their stories end and the eternal mystery of the Carroll A. Deering begins.